Hello, students. Moving forward to the rest of the so-called Part 2 of the National Water Policy 2002, the other important aspects of this water policy is on planning, irrigation, and several other administrative setup, which was drafted with an objective to improvise upon the development, management, and of course, the planning scheme of water. Now, water related development projects uh, are very much required for the wholesome welfare of the country, and that is the reason because of which this given policy also emphasizes upon water development, water resource development projects. It clearly enshrines that the water resource development projects should be as far as possible be planned and developed as multi-purpose projects. And if you remember, in the last lecture, we emphasized upon several priorities in which drinking water was one. And the similar trend is there with respect to the project planning, and hence the drinking water, the provision for drinking water should be given a primary consideration while a particular state entity goes ahead with any water resource related development project. Impact assessment study is something which we have already discussed under EIA norms and standards. And with respect to any development projects, we know that impact assessment study is mandatory. So, similarly, with respect to water resource development projects, the study of likely impact of any such project, not just during the construction but also at the later point of time, should be assessed. And for that, the assessment nexus should be drawn from one side to another. The one end will be, of course, the project itself, and on the other end, its impact on human life, settlements, socioeconomic elements, environment, occupations, and other aspects which are, in a way, essential component of that particular project planning. And in planning, implementation, and operation of these water resources project, the preservation of the quality of environment and the ecological balance should also be a primary consideration. And any such adverse effects on the environment, if any, should be minimized, and it should be offset by adequate compensatory measures. And this is something which is related to the element of sustainable development, because you're not compromising your developmental activity, you're talking about minimizing the impact, because or any development project will have some sort of impact on not just the human lives or habitats or settlements, but also the environment and ecology. With respect to planning, formulation, clearance, and implementation of all these projects upon any such area, keeping in mind the environmental ecological aspects, the integrated and multidisciplinary approach is required. So this policy also emphasizes on these things, and at the same point of time, it lays pretty much its importance on the rehabilitation programs, the R&R, the resettlement and rehabilitation of the people who usually gets displaced because of any such development projects. Special efforts should be given, for investigation and formulation of these projects for the benefit of the areas which are usually inhabited by the tribals. And this is something which I think we have discussed also previously, which are related to mineral laws, where if you remember, I mentioned about this district mineral foundation, where this district mineral fund was established under one of the EI amendments of 2015, if I'm not wrong. And see, you never know, these funds might be of several use at a certain point of time. If you remember, I did mention that the whole idea behind this was to utilize the benefit which a particular entity is deriving out of a particular mining project. So the real objective of this mineral foundation was that if, say, for example, Coal India derives certain minerals from a particular area, a royalty should be shared with the district administration, and that royalty will be saved in that district mineral fund, and that amount will be utilized for the welfare of the people who might get affected because of that particular project. Now, in this current context, if you have referred the recent proposal by the Finance Ministry for combating COVID 19, they have referred to this district mineral fund. They have referred that this amount which is there with this district mineral fund will be utilized for COVID 19 combat activities. So you never know, these funds might be utilized later point of time for not just tribal but also specially disadvantaged groups who are socially and economically weak. And here the policy also emphasizes on these sections of the society. In addition to that, this policy also draws its attention towards the drainage system, which should be an integral part of any irrigation project, right from the planning stage itself. So, from the planning stage itself, the drainage system should be taken into consideration. It's not that you consider it at the later point of time, but in the very initial stage itself. And all the times and the cost overruns or deficient realization of benefits or cost benefit analysis with respect to that particular project will also be done at that point of time. Time and cost overruns and deficient realization of benefits characterizing most water related projects should be overcome by upgrading the quality of project preparation and management. So, any inadequate funding of this water resources project should be obviated by an optimal allocation of resources on the basis of prioritization and having regard to this early completion of ongoing projects as well as the need to reduce the regional imbalances. This is more of a finance related element which emphasizes on putting certain ongoing projects on priority, and such projects should also be given more importance. And if there is any deficit in the allocation of resources, then they have to, the state entities, they have to do the permutation combination to realize and thereafter implement the projects by utilizing the funds on the basis of a prioritization. Groundwater. Now, despite the fact that we have a water law in our country, we have Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, we do also have a Water Cess Act. But despite these two major legislations, when it comes to groundwater, well, unfortunately, these legislations, they are quite silent about it. Although there is a bill which has been pending for quite a long time with respect to groundwater management. Several states, they have also adopted groundwater regulation and management. Kerala, for example, even Assam, they have one. Now, under this National Water Policy of 2002, groundwater development has been given significant importance. There should be periodical reassessment of groundwater potential on scientific basis, keeping in mind the consideration, of course, of the quality of the water which is available and its economic viability of its extraction. So, economic and qualitative viability has been given due importance under the groundwater development. Exploitation of any groundwater resources should be regulated, and it should not exceed the recharging possibilities, so that they should ensure social equality and equity. And here, any detrimental impact on the environment because of over exploitation of groundwater should be highly discouraged. And here, the central and state governments are responsible for effectively preventing such over exploitation of groundwater. Groundwater research projects should also be developed and implemented, keeping in mind the quality and availability of the groundwater resources. And for that, an integrated and coordinated approach should be taken for both surface water and groundwater resources. So, their conjunctive use should be emphasized right from the project planning stage itself, and it should be also an integral part of project implementation. On any overexploitation of the groundwater should be avoided, especially near the coast, to prevent the ingress of seawater into the sweet water aquifers. And here we have seen the municipal corporations, they are quite responsible for effective implementation of this policy initiative. There are also water users associations in several states, and municipal corporations, they do also ensure, because we know many times we might have seen from our day-to-day life experience, people have been using they've been digging down bore wells to extract groundwater, and many a times they over extract, and that is what the municipal authorities are also trying to monitor and lay down certain standards and guidelines for the same, and also prohibitions with respect to such over exploitation of the groundwater. Drinking water. Well, when it comes to priorities, drinking water usually gets rank one position. And here it is. Although we know that right to have drinking water is a fundamental right, a pollution-free drinking water is a fundamental right, but at the same point of time, when it comes to providing the facilities, the service delivery, we do have to pay for the same. Now, adequate safe drinking water facilities should be provided to the entire population. That is what the policy framework suggests. And it is not just applicable to urban areas, but also rural areas. Irrigation and multipurpose projects, which should invariably include a drinking water component, and when there is no alternative source of drinking water, they should be integrated there. So, if there is no alternative source of drinking water, the irrigation and multi-purpose projects should invariably include a drinking water component in it. And this policy also identifies that drinking water is a need of human beings and animals at the same point of time, and it should be first charge on available water. Irrigation is another component of National Water Policy 2002, where the planning has been pretty much laid, planning has been emphasized. Irrigation intensity should be such as to extend the benefits of agriculture, benefits of irrigation to larger extent, and its relationship with the farm families as possible. So the maximization of agricultural production, cost-effective irrigation options, and irrigation planning and management of any such project is very much important. So there should be very close integration of water use and land use policies. So it's not that the land use policy should deviate from the water use policies, and there is a dire need for close integration, because here comes the point where both these two elements become part and parcel of agricultural production. Water allocation is another crucial factor, because if you are from a rural area, you must be already aware that when it comes to irrigation, many a times the farmers and all, they struggle to share the water resources. So water allocation and irrigation system needs to be done with due regard to equity and social justice. So the language is very clear, and the language of this policy pays due regard to equity and social justice. However, the grassroots reality is quite bitter. There are still disparities, which is their head reach and tail end farms, large and small scale farms. Unfortunately, the water distribution system has not been adopted as this policy is talking about. It is talking about an adoption of a rotational water distribution system and supply of water on volumetric basis. However, by putting certain ceiling and rational pricing, but unfortunately, from my personal experience, I haven't seen that. Here, the challenge is with the irrigation department. The water users associations are also there, which are trying their best. And of course, there are several factors which we cannot ignore in a way in a society. And that's the major challenge. And here, hence, the concerted efforts should be made to ensure that these irrigation potential created is fully utilized at the same point of time. Private sector participation has been encouraged in planning, development, and management of water resources projects in the country. And private sector participation, why it is required? Because private sector participation, along with the government sector itself, is responsible for several ideas, finance, and corporate management, service efficiency. So, in order to boost innovation, in order to get financial aids and resources, in order to boom the corporate management, and in order to improve the service accountability and efficiency, private sector participation will be of great help. This is what the national water policy also talks about. When it comes to the quality, not just the groundwater, but also the surface water quality should be monitored. Phase-wise program should be adopted. Whatever the effluents that the industries are generating, they should be treated in acceptable limits and levels, and standards before discharging them into the natural streams. There should also be minimum flow that is to be ensured in a perennial stream for proper maintenance to balance, keep the ecological balance intact. And the principle of polluter pays, which we have already discussed, should be followed in management of water pollution. So, when it comes to water quality and ensuring the standards, monitoring of water quality, the principle of polluter pays should be followed, and the national water policy clearly talks about it, clearly envisages the same. In addition to that, the policy also talks about, zoning. It talks about economic development and activities, which usually include not just agricultural but also industrial and urban development. They should be planned with respect to the constraints imposed by the configuration of water availability. That is the reason because of which the policy is suggesting for a water zoning of the country, and it should be guided and regulated based on the economic activity. So that is the nexus which is there with respect to water zoning. Planning, management, development can never be successful until unless you have proper conservation cautiousness. And that is the reason because of which the conservation cautiousness has been promoted by the National Water Policy of 2002 through education, regulation, incentives, disincentives, and the resources which should be conserved, in this case the water, and the availability augmented should be by maximization of retention and elimination of any pollution, and of course minimization of losses. So for this, several measures can be taken, which includes modernization, rehabilitation of existing systems, like introduction of recycling and reuse of treatment plants, adoption of traditional techniques like pitcher irrigation, or mulching. These kind of things, even drip and sprinkler may be promoted wherever it is possible, in order to conserve the water. These are some of the traditional as well as modern techniques that the policy is talking about should be adopted in order to conserve water. Flood is another major problem which many of the states are facing, including the state of Assam. So every state have been encouraged at the same point of time, the national level, to adopt a master plan for flood control and management, especially for the flood-prone basins. And I believe this part of the country is some, of course, it is something which is a major problem for the government, and hence the water policy talks about adequate flood cushion that should be provided in water storage projects, and wherever it is possible, you also facilitate better flood management. And you have to do that by taking certain regulatory policies, and you might also have to sacrifice something in the cost of some other benefit. So that is a permutation combination which the states are supposed to ensure with respect to control and management. In addition to that, the drought prone area development and land erosion by sea and river has also found due significance under the National Water Policy of 2002. In order to improve the performance, there is a dire need for a paradigm shift in the management of water resources. So that is the reason they have laid emphasis on allocation of funds under the water resources sector, which should be reprioritized to ensure that the needs for the development and as well as the maintenance and operation of these facilities are met. So modernization and maintenance is something which requires massive investments. So structures and systems should be created through massive investments, which should be properly maintained in good health. And there should be regular monitoring. Until unless you have regular monitoring, you cannot figure out what is going on and how far you have succeeded. And that is a reason because of which the National Water Policy of 2002 asked for the formation of water users association, which many of the states already have right now. And these water user associations have been asked to give in certain authorities and responsibilities to facilitate the management, including the maintenance of irrigation system, which I mentioned a while back in a time bound. Science and technology is something which you cannot totally discard, because without research and development, without scientific know-how or even the technology, you cannot have an effective and economic management of any resources, be it water resources or any other form of natural resources. So in this 21st century, the frontiers of knowledge needs to be pushed forward in several directions, and there should be intensification of research efforts in various areas, which in fact this water policy identifies as, say, for example, hydrometeorology, then snow and lake hydrology, surface groundwater hydrology, water harvesting, evaporation seepage lodges, recycling and reuse, crops and cropping system, solar and material research. So all these sectors are relevant, and even water management practices and improvements in operational technology. So S&T, so-called research and development, science and technology, the efforts should be there with respect to all these areas for an effective implementation of national water policy. And nothing can be done until unless you have proper capacity building programs. So the perspective plan for any standardized training should be an integral part of water resource development. So lay emphasis on training, which should extend to all categories of personnel who are involved in the activities, which in fact also includes the farmers. So finally, this is what the National Water Policy 2002 is all about. So in the concluding remark, the policy clearly highlights that water is of vital importance, not just for humans, but also for animals. It is required for maintaining ecological balance. It is required for socioeconomic development of all the kinds. You have scarcity, which is enhancing. So planning and management of these resources, and it's not just optimal or economical, but also equitable use, become a matter of great urgency. And let's not forget the role which a community can play in order to manage these water resources. So the success of this national water policy will entirely depend on evolving and maintaining national consensus and commitment to its underlying principles and objectives. So the national water policy also talks about the state should also adopt state water policy, which should be backed by an operational action plan, which should be formulated in a time-bound manner. Only then they can go ahead and achieve all the objectives which this water policy has adopted. In furtherance to this National Water Policy of 2002, India also adopted National Water Policy of 2012. So as of now, we have this under the National Water Policy of 2002. In the next lecture, we might refer to other facets relating to environmental law. Thank you very much.